Hey, Lead Up listeners, Mike Harbour. I'm really excited today on the Lead Up podcast as I get to interview a friend, a colleague, someone I've worked with before. He's down in Florida now. Won't hold that against him, but he's from Arkansas originally, where I'm at. Mark and I have worked together in some of his leadership roles. He's currently the COO of a hospital in Gainesville, Florida, with a company called HCA Healthcare. He was the CEO at Unity Health here in Arkansas not too long ago. We became fast friends and colleagues working together, helping do some leadership development in the world that he was in at that time. Mark, I'm really excited to talk with you today about leadership. Welcome to the Lead Up Podcast.
Thanks, Mike. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, it's really good to have you. Just tell the Lead Up audience a little bit about just a short history of you and just kind of some of the leadership roles you've had. So I can ask you some hard questions about some of those things.
Well, thanks, Mike. And I know you'll ask me those hard questions. I love your style, love your podcast, love all the work you're doing, especially in the quit losing talent framework. It's phenomenal. Like you said, originally from Arkansas, grew up in Arkansas. Both you and I are alumni of Henderson State University. I started my healthcare journey down in Houston in graduate school, and spent several years in and around the Texas Medical Center, sort of kind of cutting my teeth on healthcare leadership. Had a chance to come back to Arkansas for about 10 years and working at the University of Arkansas for medical sciences and Arkansas Children's, and kind of getting into the children's hospital space where I've spent the bulk of my career so far. In On the pediatric side, in on the practice and the physician practice side, but also kind of transitioning into the acute care side. And about 10 years ago, as I was looking at different opportunities and how do I continue to evolve my career, started thinking about the children's hospital space is phenomenal. It's a really special place. There's about 200 of them in the country as opposed to the 6,000 hospitals. And
Mm-hmm.
so I kept getting a little bit drawn closer to the adult side. And in 2018, I had the opportunity to join HCA Healthcare out in our Far West division in Las Vegas. And so my family and I spent about 5 years out on the West Coast in Las Vegas and in San Jose, California. And during that journey, felt led to kind of maybe test myself in a different way in the rural healthcare independent health system world. So that led me back to Arkansas and Unity Health for a short period of time. And through a series of different things, it became clear to me that I really am cut from the cloth that many of our HCA leaders are cut from, and that sort of bias towards action and doing and those sorts of things. And reconnected with a couple of my colleagues in HCA and found myself, drawn back here. And so this is our second tour of duty in Gainesville. Although I'm a razorback in the swamp, it's okay. It's a great place to be. But I love, love, love working for HCA and here at HCA Florida, North Florida Hospital, and all that we're doing and building a new hospital, growing programs, and really trying to do my part to grow our leaders.
That's fantastic. So yeah, I'm sure being an Arkansas fan in Arkansas is hard enough because we have our struggles right now, especially on the football field, and of course basketball. One of my least favorite team, Mark. We're going to get into sports now, I guess, for a minute. My least favorite team to watch in the SEC is Ole Miss, and the basketball team lost to them yesterday in the SEC
I
tournament.
know.
So frustrating. And of course, I'm no Florida fan. I actually don't like any teams but Arkansas and the SEC. Right. So, but it's hard to root for. I'm glad baseball season. We start baseball season tonight against Ole Miss at Ole Miss. So
That's right.
it'll be fun to watch. Hopefully they'll win that series. But let's talk about leadership and your role as the COO. You said you're working on leadership development. Talk about your philosophy of developing leaders and why you feel that's so important, especially in today's environment of healthcare and just workforce in general.
Yeah, Mike, it's such an important question. When we think about, and I think about, our organization, clearly, HCA is a very large organization. 180 hospitals across 42 markets, 300,000 employees. But it's also very local. It's very hyper local, in fact, when we think about the patient and how do we really execute on the promise of exceptional care and exceptional experience for those patients. And that can only happen when you have people in place that understand the mission and understand what is at the center of our focus. And the center of our focus is that patient, right? And so as I roll through my journey, and as the COO, my job is broad and both deep and wide. Whether it's overseeing the environment of care and all the ancillary support areas of the organization, or part of my role right now is we're building a new hospital here in town as an expansion of our facility. And so how we execute on that agenda is through leaders. And this year in 2025, I like the whole idea of a word for the year. A couple of years ago, my word was momentum. This year it's action. How do we create action, and how do we activate our team? And when I think about activating our team and what does that look like, whether you're a nursing leader on a unit, or you're the OR director, or you're maybe a vice president of some sort, it's the idea of autonomous leadership, right? So if I have to personally make all the decisions, or be involved in every single decision that's made in the organization at every department, we'll never get anything done, right? That's not going to happen. And so it's about empowering those individuals and giving them a framework to where they understand that as a leader at whatever level, whether you're a supervisor, a manager, director, what have you, is that you have to truly be the CEO of your domain, whatever that is. And there is for sure a chain of command in which we all live within, so that if I need help, or I have a barrier, or I need a resource, I know how to get that up my chain of command. But there's also a body of work that I'm charged with as a leader at whatever level that is. And our goal, and one of the things that we're focused here at HCA Florida, North Florida, is how do we continue to encourage our leaders to be autonomous leaders and making those decisions that are within their domain, to continue moving that ball forward and really having that bias towards action.
Love that. I love the word activate. It's one of my strategies in the QLT framework, right? Is activating that full potential in leaders and our employees to create a more engaged culture. But talk about some tactical things, Mark, you guys are doing to really create those autonomous leaders. Because I know in my experience, I was doing a training workshop with a company this morning, and that all of us as leaders, senior leaders, you and all other senior leaders, we want a team of leaders that are autonomous, that are critical thinkers, that will move and make decisions. And I'll hold my ideas for a minute, but we want that as autonomous leaders, but often they're kind of stuck waiting, right? Waiting to be told what to do, maybe. And oftentimes that's because they often in healthcare, especially, they get promoted because they're a great clinician or whatever it is. And they've never really been developed as a leader and how to do that. So what are some tactical, practical things you guys are working on or doing or really implementing to create that philosophy of autonomous leadership?
Yeah. So once again, very important to think through that intentionally, right? Because you're right. We are really, really good at identifying somebody's talent in their given thing, whether they're a nurse or they're a physician or they're a business professional. But that doesn't always translate into being an exceptional leader of a team or an organization or what have you. And so the tactics that we're deploying is, number one, is understand and give people permission to make mistakes, right? We are not perfect. We practice things for a reason. Whether it's drilling our code blues, or we do simulation with our physicians and our residents. We don't expect perfection, but we aim towards it, right? And it's not a destination. It's not something we're going to achieve. And so it's this continuous reps of just like being in the gym every day and getting better every day. So number one is giving people permission to fail fast and fail cheap, right? To get it done. If I'm going to fail on something, let's do that quickly and understand why, and then pivot and move forward. And so what that looks like is helping our leaders understand the difference between accountability and responsibility, right? Two very different things. I may be responsible for the care of this patient because I'm the nurse that's responsible for the care of that patient, but I may be accountable to my colleagues. I may be accountable to that patient and that patient's family. I may be accountable to my leader or what have you. And so really understanding, and as our leaders scale the ladder of leadership from, a bedside nurse, not using nursing as an example because a really visual one, you're a bedside nurse, then you move to a charge nurse or maybe a manager or a director. And each of those stair steps, you gain a broader sphere of influence, a broader sphere of responsibility, but you also have a broader sphere of accountability, and helping them understand, how do I become not only an autonomous leader, but being autonomous leader also includes self-accountability, right? If you think about accountability for a moment, some people will define that as, well, you're going to hold me accountable, therefore you're micromanaging me, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what if I ask you to hold yourself accountable, right? And so when you are doing whatever thing it is that you're doing, are you acting the same when you're by yourself and with your team as you would if I'm standing there with you in your huddle with your department, or if I'm rounding in your department? Are you going to be the same person? Are you going to be looking at the same things? Are you going to be taking the same actions? And so our approach is to continue to encourage and focus our leaders on those things, which are, that self accountability and understanding the difference between responsibility and accountability, so that we can start achieving some of this kind of broader, higher level thinking around autonomous leadership.
Yeah, that's really good. I like it. I've started teaching, Mark, alignment versus accountability, mainly because of what you
Yeah.
said. Is often people wait on someone else to hold them accountable. But then when you hold them accountable, they don't like it. They call it micromanaging, right? And so one of the things that I really work to help leaders do is, number one, fight for clarity about
Mm-hmm.
expectations or actions. As you know, I love that word actions you're talking about. Like, what are the actions we need our leaders to take? What are the expectations we have for them? And then hold them in alignment to the behaviors that drive that, right? That drive those actions. So if we create that clarity, then we can hold them into alignment. Then hopefully they'll be self-accountable. I don't have to do the accountability piece, because for some reason people rebel against the term accountability, right? Everybody loves
Yes.
accountability till they're being held accountable. Or they want all their teammates held accountable, but they don't want to be held accountable themselves, right? And because I hear that a lot. Well, we just need some accountability around here. We need everybody to be held accountable, but then when it comes, oh, you mean me too? Yeah, absolutely.
That's right.
Let's go backwards a little bit though. When you were starting out in leadership, because I love how you kind of gave us the picture of, bedside nurse, charge nurse, nurse manager, shift manager, whatever it may be. And I'm a believer that at every level we climb, there's another layer of leadership we have to learn. Another skill set. Oftentimes we call them skills, soft skills. I'm a believer they're essential skills. But talk about kind of your stepping yourself, Mark, as you went from, a manager, supervisor, wherever it was that you started, intern. I think you started, as a resident or whatever in your program, to now COO, CEO, administrator level. What are some of those things you've had to learn along the way that you're in a place where you're having to teach and develop in others?
Yeah. It's an interesting question in that, as we do that climb, we always like to talk about these things around emotional intelligence. Oh, they have emotional intelligence, so they don't have emotional. Really, it's kind of gets back to what you just said. I love the word clarity, but also sort of coupled with that from a personal level is awareness. Do I have awareness of who I am as a leader? Do I have awareness of what's around me as a leader? How are my interactions interplaying with others? So as I've gone through my journey, that's something that I've really focused on. And early on in my career, I could tell you I would go sit down in a room in a meeting and with a group of folks, and I may be like laser focused on the task at hand or the thing that I'm dealing with, but maybe not aware of the body language, aware of the what's happening in the room.
Yeah.
And so as I've grown, that's been something I've really focused on is okay, what's going around that's not being said? What's going
Mm,
around with the team that's not being said? Sometimes that is as loud of a message as the words that are being said. And so when you think about team dynamics, creating that clarity, creating that intentionality, creating that sense of self accountability, for me, that's been part of my journey, is really understanding, and at every level, to your point, as we sort of gain this sphere of influence, that sense of awareness. And as I mentor young people or leaders coming up through the organization, one of the things that I like to share with them is in this idea of a nurse leader is just a really good example, because you kind of go from being on the team, like a player on the team, to
mm,
the coach of the team, and then to go to the general manager of the team. And when you
yeah.
transition from to the coach into the general manager, suddenly you're not part of the team. I mean, you're part of the team, but you're not a player anymore, right? And so you have to learn to extract yourself a little bit from the dynamics of that team. And so as you climb that ladder, and as I've climbed the ladder, we often think about this as it just gets a little bit, the cone of information gets quieter, and it gets a little lonelier as you go along, right? And less information comes into your cone of information, so you have to seek it. You have to go and seek that information out, and we sometimes call that trust but verify, right?
Mm.
And just because somebody said they did something, did they actually do it? Did the result actually result in the thing that we wanted it to be resulted in? And so the key there is not verifying in a way that is punitive to somebody, right? But having systems in place that give you that feedback, and give you that feedback loop, such that the cone of information around you isn't quiet, but I have the data, I have the information, and I don't necessarily have to rely on somebody to come tell me everything, but I know how to go seek that out in a way that's not going to be seen as punitive, or me getting into their business, or me micromanaging them, or holding them accountable.
That's really good, Mark. Thank you. There's a couple things that you hit on that that we that I want to dig deeper in. Number one, you talked about awareness and developing that self-awareness. One of like what layer are we at? I love your analogy of you go from player on the team to kind of leader of the team, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and being aware of the transition that needs to happen, and then seeking information. I think that's what, when there's a lack of clarity. I just taught this to a group of leaders this morning. When there's a lack of clarity, it's your responsibility as a leader to go find it, to
Mm-hmm.
fight for it, right? And that may mean I've got to ask my boss for that because my boss didn't create
Sure.
clarity as well. So, what are some tips you give leaders that maybe they're sitting at a director level or an AVP level or a VP level even. They know they don't have clarity, because let's be honest, Mark. Even though you and I sit at the highest levels of the organization, we think we're good at giving clarity sometimes when we're not.
For
So,
sure. For sure.
what do you do with your leaders to give them the ability to step into that, to seek that clarity from you? Because I think that's an important topic for us to talk about.
Yeah. So Mike, you're getting into the idea of culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
so fundamentally, if we're doing what we need to do to teach the essential skills, if you will, to our leaders, such that they, know their job, they know their job functions, they know how to, you know, work within their team. Okay, so now let's take that out of that scenario. Okay, I'm executing on the things I need to execute on in my department. However, I don't have a lot of clarity on how is my department, how does my sphere of influence, whatever it might be, interface with the rest of the hospital, the rest of the organization. what is our direction as an organization? How do we win in that? How do we stay out of the penalty box? How do we, not have a foul, whatever it might be? And there's a couple of ways that I like to approach that. Number one, from a culture perspective, you have to create a culture in which your team, you are approachable to them, right? And so if we're only managing or leading from your office or from your desk, nobody will ever come to you, right? They will see that as the principal's office, and that's where you go to get your pink slip. That's where you go to get expelled. That's where you go to get suspended, whatever. But if they see me on the floor in their space, wearing their uniform, leaning into them in their world, then that breaks down that barrier. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, I have really one job. I mean, it's very fun, very simple. I have one job, and that is to serve my team, right? I can't go lay hands on a patient. I can't, give somebody an IV. I can't, do that. That's not my role. My role is to serve my team. Sure, there are other things that are sort of strategic and business functions that our executive team does within our own executive team, but from an organizational perspective, our job here in the administrative suite is really a job of service. It's a job of service to our team. We can't do that from our office, right? And so for me, it's really, really important, and it's where I find success in that is literally being in their space. At first, if they haven't been around leaders that are in their space, it's really uncomfortable. And it's like, why are you here? Why you're checking up on us? Like, no. I'm here because I want to support you. Help me understand your frustrations. Help me understand the rocks in your shoes. How do I help take those rocks out? So that's one piece of it, is really being in their space and being in their ecosystem. So we do things like a walk in your world, for example, where we're going to put on scrubs and we're going to go spend a half a shift with an EVS colleague or a sterile processing colleague or whatever it might be, right? Our nursing leaders will go spend a day with one of our facility engineers. And so there's this cross-pollination of information. It's breaking down those silos. So to me, that is a critical element of breaking down the silos to help our leaders understand that, hey, I'm here to serve them. And if they understand that, and I've given them the freedom to do that will get at that piece. The other thing, like I like to communicate with more of our higher level leaders, so vice presidents or service line leaders or et cetera, is hang out after the meeting, right? So or hang out later, right? And what I mean by that is we all know we go to, my calendar's booked from dawn to dusk every day, and everybody has a meeting about something. But in that sort of that space in between those, whether it's kind of at the end of the day or maybe it's at the beginning of the day, show up, hang out, just pass through the hall, and my door is always open. Stop and say, hey, I got a question. Say, can we talk about X? And be willing to do that. And for me personally, when I was an administrative resident back in the day and in Houston, that was something that I found extremely valuable. Probably 3 to 4 times a day, I would just round through the executive suite and kind of looking to see whose door was open. And yeah, they may be answering some emails or whatever. I just knock on the door. Hey, do you have 5 minutes? Can I ask you a question about something? And what that's doing is that's one, saying, hey, I'm hungry, I'm eager, I want to learn. But number two, it's also building that relationship.
Yeah.
And none of that can happen though if you don't have the culture in which that you are an approachable leader, right? You aren't just a suit that's sitting in the corner in your office and you're never seen on the floor.
Yeah, I think what's really critical there, Mark, is I love it, is establishing the relationship, right? The first thing we have to overcome is, why is Mark here, right? They may not say that out loud, but in between their ears are like, what's wrong? Why is the leader here? Why is the CEO walking around? Why is the COO walking around, right? And we have to overcome that first. And a couple things, I teach in my book, Quit Losing Talent, are C-squared rounding, which is, in healthcare, what I saw is healthcare rounding became more of a check the box. Yeah, I went by, I asked them if they needed anything. They said they were good. That was it. And so I think the intentional, what I call C-squared rounding is have a connecting question, like a connecting conversation. That's what C-squared, stands for, is a connecting conversation. And you have to do that intentionally. And it's not job related. It's, hey, Mark, how's your son doing that soccer tournament this weekend? How's your wife? And the issues going on with her. Now, to know those things, you need to have some relationship there, right?
That's right.
But when you connect, then when they see you coming, they're not afraid of the boss, so to speak, coming in. It creates that culture of openness that you describe. The other conversation is a talent lock conversation, where we're frequently having conversations with our employees about their job and their role and what's frustrating about it, versus just coming in and being a taskmaster and like, hey, we got this safety issue going on. I needed to bring that to your attention. Because if that's all you bring, then they just say, oh gosh, here's Mark with another problem I got to fix, right? Not that those things aren't important as leaders.
Sure.
So how does your organization go about building that culture of openness, culture of one of the things I'd love for you to even get into, Mark, is that culture of mistakes are okay when we're in an industry, an environment that says do no harm, right? So how do you balance those two?
Yeah, so you hit on something a moment ago that I think is really central to this, and that is, if the only time anybody sees me is when there's a problem, then we've already failed, right? And so to get at that culture, it's the idea of consistency, right? I have to be consistent in the way that I approach my leaders. So if, for the next week, if I'm in their department every day or twice a day because there's something going on, whatever it might be, sure, I'm consistently there, but what about next week? What about the week after that? What about a month from now? If they don't see me every day or every other day or frequently enough, they're like, oh, well, he's just going to show up when there's a problem. And but he'll go away. We'll get through that and he'll go away. We'll have our action plan. We'll do all of our things, and he'll go away. But no, we have to be very, very intentional. And here within HCA, we are very data driven company, lots and lots and lots of data. And so just like your idea around C-squared rounding, which I love, and I think it's just it really hits centrally to that issue, is we have an employee rounding toolkit that we use that every leader in the organization is expected to follow. And it's exactly what you just described. It's a personal connection. Then it gets into, do you have the resources, tools, and that you need to do your job? Who do you want to recognize on your team, et cetera? So it goes through a series of questions that the expectation is, me as a leader, I'm rounding on every one of my employees every month, right? If I have 150 employees in my department, it may be very hard to do that, especially if I'm a department that's a 24/7 department, like a nursing unit or what have you. But that's the expectation, that I'm rounding on all of my employees every month and asking those questions. Likewise, me as an executive, I have to do the same thing, right? I have to get out of my office and I need to round on my leaders formally once a month. But then there's all those informal touch points. Hey, let's go grab a coffee together. Let's go grab lunch together. I really want to hear what's going on in your world. How are your parents? How are your kids? Building those relationships, like just one little marble in the jar at a time. And it's that consistency to me that starts building that. And then, I think the other piece of it is, and this is one of the reasons I love your framework as well, it's around selection of employees, right? So hiring people just to fill a slot is not going to get us very far, right? And so for me, when I think about culture, it's attitude and effort, right? I want to hire for the right attitude, and I want somebody that's going to give us the effort. We can teach somebody to do just about anything, but I can't necessarily change their attitude, right? Some people, you might be able to motivate them differently, but fundamentally, they're going to come with the attitude that they have. And if they have the attitude or willing to give their effort, then we start to make progress in a really meaningful way.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, the selection is so important. And, I believe that we have to start talking about attitude and effort in the interview process,
That's
right?
right.
And then that helps, Mark, what I was saying earlier about creating alignment. I can come back to you and say, hey, Mark, you remember when we interviewed and we talked about attitude and effort? Help me understand where your attitude's at today versus that discussion we had then. So I don't have to say, hey, Mark, get a better attitude. I just say, help me
That's right.
understand. You're kind of not aligned with what our expectations were set during that interview process. So that's where I'm
That's right.
talking about alignment. If I set the expectation early on and then I just hold to that line, I can bring people into alignment with that versus having to have what we call in the healthcare counseling sessions, right? I don't want to counsel anybody. I just want to have alignment conversation. Hey,
That's right.
Mark, man, your effort seems a little bit low. It seems like something's wrong. Help me understand, you know, what
That's
you
right.
need to get us back in alignment with what we need. So I love that. And it begins in the selection process for sure. You're going to add to that?
No, you're exactly right. In an industry where we have, labor challenges, we have workforce supply side issues, you know, we often get kind of stuck with the number. Like we need 10 of these, 50 of those, 100 of those. And how
Mm-hmm.
do we fill them with, and how do we just keep, we don't want contract labor. We don't want X, Y, or Z. But if we just step back and we take our moment to hire the right person, then that person will be with us forever. Right.
Yeah.
And as you know, in your work, people leave leaders, they don't leave jobs.
Yeah. That's right.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And in getting back to that, the number, I love what you just said. We get focused on the number. We need 5 of these, 10 of these, or whatever. And what I talk about in the QLT framework is get focused on the who, like create a who scorecard. And like sometimes we might need 10 whats, but we only need 2 who's because those who's, if they fit right, Mark, they can do the
Mm-hmm.
work of 3 other people, right?
That's
Uh,
right. That's right.
the right attitude, the right effort can do the work of 2 or 3 other people oftentimes. And so as leaders, we do have to understand if we'll focus more on who we're hiring, not what we're getting from them,
Mm-hmm.
they'll often, because of their attitude and their effort, give us more discretionary effort and reduce your leadership frustrations. Because if you hire 5 wrong people, you're going to spend a lot of time doing a lot of leadership counseling and coaching, right? But if you hire 2 right people when you need 5, I'm not saying don't continue to look for 3 more, but
Sure.
it's more important to get a couple of perfect or close to perfect fits because your leadership challenges are, just from a culture standpoint, a teamwork, a morale. If you get 1 or
Mm-hmm.
2 bad apples on the team, the morale and the teamwork and the engagement and all of those things, you've created more problems than just a vacancy problem. You've created other issues too. So how do you guys alleviate that, Mark? And how do you coach your leaders to focus more on the who hiring side versus the what hiring side?
Well, I think it goes back to not putting the entire decision on one individual, right?
Mm,
I have a department right now that have a really strong supervisor that has sort of gone out and brought with her a whole lot of people she used to work with at another organization. And sure, they're perfectly aligned to her because they're her people, but they may not be aligned to us,
mm,
right? And so how does that translate into the execution on the task at hand? How does that translate into us achieving our goals, et cetera? What does that look like in our turnover? What does that look like in our long-term employee engagement, et cetera? So all the things that we're measuring around that that alignment with that supervisor may not show up in other places. So that gives us some red flags and some pause there. So one of the things that we've done is creating this a multi-step process that is not a laborious process, right?
mm-hmm.
Clearly, the leader has to sort in and sort out the candidates, making sure that they've got whoever that they've decided on that they want, but also having a peer interview and making sure that the peers that person is going to be working with have full alignment that, hey, we're going to bring Sally on our team. Is Sally aligned with us to help us win?
Mm-hmm.
because if she's not, it's going to be exponentially harder for all of us, and we're going to be picking up her slack, and she's going to be calling off all the time, and she may not even ultimately stay with us, and then we're going to have another vacancy, and we're going to have to fill that again. And then the third step is that for everybody we hire in our organization, they have a senior leader interview. One of
Mm-hmm.
our senior leaders sits down with every single person we hire, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and just looks them in the eye and says, tell me about yourself. Because in that 5 minutes or 10 minutes, we can get a really good sense of whether that person is correctly sorted in or not. I'm not going to tell whether a pharmacist has the skill set to do the job or not. I'm not
Right.
going to tell whether the nurse has the skill set to do the job or not. But I can tell that, oh, you're working 3 other jobs. Maybe that's not the right selection, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you don't live within an hour and a half of our organization. Oh, maybe that was blind to our leader who was trying to fill the spot but loved her attitude, right? So sometimes there's things that we as sort of an unbiased person can see in the mix and help make that hard decision, which is, this is a great individual. Maybe it'd be best if we hired them in a PRN role and not into one of our full-time slots. And yes, I know that means we're going to be short again for a little while, but let's go get the right person. And how do I help you do that? How can I support you in doing that? And it gets back to this idea of intentionality, right?
Mm-hmm.
And being really, really intentional about about going through that process, and not just, as you mentioned earlier, just checking the box like when you're rounding, right? I'm going to do my drive-by round. Saw Mike today. He had a smile on his face. Well, maybe it's payday. I don't know. And Mike got a smile on his face, but on Monday he's going to be frustrated because he's got 7 patients or 8 patients or whatever it is. But having that intentionality, and so I think that in that process there has to be a lot of intentionality.
Yeah, that's really good. Teaching our leaders how to do interviews is an important skill because look, the reality is we don't do a lot of it, right, Mark? I don't know how many
Yeah.
I've done 20,000 plus interviews, so I feel like I'm pretty good at it. But the reality is most leaders might do 5 a year, 10 a
Hmm.
year if they have a huge need. So really doing some role playing and teaching them how to do that. A simple question is, hey, Mark, what do you know about our company and why do you want to work here?
That's
What
right.
attracted you here, right? You can learn a lot about the internal. Well, I just need a job, or well, you guys pay more than the job down the street. That's not a really good why. That's not a really good reason to hire somebody.
That's right.
And so I'm really looking, and then I always recommend leaders learn the skill of the question behind the questions. A great book, QBQ, right? Question behind the
Hmm.
questions. Once I ask a question, be a really good listener, and then ask the follow up question that sometimes you don't want to ask. I heard
That's
you
right.
say that you really had some challenges with some of your teammates over there. Tell me more about that.
Hmm.
Instead of just letting that go, right? Maybe it wasn't the teammates over there. Maybe it was that individual. And I think that's important. But so many leaders are scared. I got to fill these positions. I don't want to run this person off. How do y'all support your leaders in like I'm a believer. Let's run them off during the interview, not after they get here.
That's right.
So what kind of philosophy are you guys teaching around that, Mark?
Well, I think it's exactly right. So you really have to, um, we have to help our leaders understand that selection is just that, it's a selection, right? It's not we have 10 applicants. Who was the first one, first batter up, let's go. It's really about choosing that person, attitude and effort to get towards our goals. And, I think by and large, our leadership team understand where we're headed from a goal perspective. And the question is Mike going to help me get there? Is
Mm-hmm.
Mike going to help provide exceptional care to my patients? Is Mike going to help provide exceptional experiences to my patients? And if not, let's make that hard decision now. And I'll tell you, a perfect example. We have our cardiac unit sit down a young lady, very sharp young lady, very smart, capable, skilled nurse, for her sort of senior leader interview. And I was the next guy up and doing senior leader interviews that day. So sit down with her in my office and talking to her. It's like, hey, do you even know why you're here? I have no idea why I'm meeting with you. It's okay. Most people don't. let's talk through it. I'm just trying to get a sense of who you are and, what have you. So I had the interview. After it was over, I had a real gut check. I was like, there was something about her that I really didn't feel like that she wanted to be here. It was almost that trying too hard, trying to tell
Mhm.
me exactly what I wanted to know and not really, being authentic. Pick
Mhm.
up the phone, call my leader. It's like, so tell me about Sally. Well, what did you think? Like when I gave her my opinion, it's like, oh, thank goodness, because I really don't want her.
Mhm.
And so that was an awesome opportunity for a moment to help her be comfortable saying no, right?
Yeah, that's so good.
She didn't have to like go through that whole process and send her down to me to interview her. If she didn't like her, she could have just said, hey, we're done, let's move on. But
Yeah.
it gets back to that. Does she feel like she has permission to do that because she has 15 openings on her department and she knows that she needs to fill these positions, and she personally feels the pain of not having enough people on her team?
Mhm.
But she feel like that she had permission to do that, right?
Mhm.
And that was a great opportunity for me to say, hey, look, you have permission. If this is not the right person, don't make that mistake. I'm here for you. Our team's behind you. We'll do that every day of the week.
Mhm.
There are other fish out there. There are better people out there. Let's get the right one. That to me is just a really critical element for our leaders to understand that. And it gets back to us giving them permission to make mistakes, giving them permission to work through that in their own way, but being able to raise their hand and say, "Hey, I'm not comfortable here. I don't like this situation. This person may not fit for me."
Yeah, man, that's a great example. Yeah, giving them, it goes back to that autonomous leadership you talk about, giving them the autonomy to say no, but I think also teaching them how to go back to their team and say, hey, we had somebody, but they weren't the right fit. Because the team's
That's right.
feeling that too, right? The team's like, you
Yeah.
gotta hire somebody, Mark. We're drowning here. And one of the worst things we can do to the team is just throw another warm body out there that's
Mhm.
not going to be the right fit for us, because that
Mhm.
creates even more issues. So, Mark, we've been talking a while. Time went by really fast. I know we could probably keep talking for an hour or more, but one of the just a couple of other things. I want to get back to one thing that I asked that we really didn't get get into a whole lot, but healthcare is culturally is do no harm, right?
Mhm.
But then again, you just gave another example about it's okay to make mistakes. How do we translate that into our culture and our behavior? Hey, we want you making mistakes. It's not okay to make mistakes in healthcare. We want you to make mistakes, but it's not okay to, because some mistakes in healthcare can be fatal, right? So
Mhm.
help our listeners understand how you and your team balance that. We want you making mistakes because that's how you learn, but we got to make sure we do no harm at the same time.
Yeah, Mike, I think it's delineating, um, you know, the kind of mistake you're making, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I mean our goal is zero harm to our patients. That is fundamentally our goal. However, we know things happen. We are humans. Even in a Six Sigma organization, 3.14 defects per million.
Mm-hmm.
Perfection doesn't exist, right? It gets really, 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 really good over time, but it's still there's always defects. Planes still crash, et cetera, et cetera. You can point to a million examples. So the question is not whether mistakes happen, but what surrounds those mistakes and what do
Mm-hmm.
we do about them? And do we have a culture of transparency such that people are willing to raise their hand and said, hey, I think we just made a mistake. Hey, I think that we just made an error. And so one of the things that we do and most every other hospital in the country does is we have a very transparent reporting system around errors on the patient safety side, right? Where we encourage and we actually track how many errors are reported. And it sounds counterintuitive, but the more errors that are reported, the safer your environment is. Because
Mm-hmm.
that means you're going through the checklist and you notice that the tire pressure on the plane is low. And that doesn't mean that there was a patient harmed, but it means that we had an error and we need to fix that error,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so the goal is to catch all of those from a patient perspective, is to catch everything before it gets to the patient, not sitting here going, oh my gosh, we just had a wrong site surgery, or we just had a whatever. No, we got to put the systems in place and the safety net in place that keeps that from ever touching the patient. But from a team perspective, we have to have trust and accountability amongst ourselves and transparency amongst ourselves that we are reporting and communicating and saying, hey, we had a near miss here. We had, something else that didn't go right there. So you're exactly right. This is whether it's healthcare or just about any other industry, we don't want injury, we don't want harm, but mistakes don't necessarily translate into harm, right? Mistakes can be lots of things. I didn't call into work. I forgot to call into work today. I didn't get some task done today. And so it's really around creating that culture. We call that a just culture, where you are bifurcating behavior from systems, right? So if we have the systems in place such that it doesn't allow for mistakes, or it allows for a hyper reduction in mistakes, that's where we're aiming. That's where we're focusing. That's where technology comes in, AI, whatever else you want to look at. That's what creating an ecosystem such that mistakes are fewer and far between. However, there's also the human behavior side of that, right? And am I, as an individual, making a decision to do something wrong, or is this just, hey, I'm human and I just forgot to do that thing. I just forgot to put the bio indicator in the tray that I sterilized, and when it was opened in the OR, oh, that wasn't in there. Okay, great. Set that one aside, get the next one, pull it up. We're good to go. Now, how do we keep that from happening again? What do we need to do so that your human behavior, because we're going to fail as humans, is not going to, it's going to be mitigated? What do? We do that with a system.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so good. Love it. Mark, I'd love to talk to you for a much longer time, but I know you got real things to go do, so I want to let you get back
my
to
pleasure.
it. Yeah. Last question for you. What's your superpower, your leadership superpower? How do you use it? How does it help you?
It's a great question. You'd email me a couple of questions, and I was thinking about this. Like, I don't know that I have a superpower. So, one of my colleagues, he and I were, he's a younger executive, said, what's my superpower? What do you think is my superpower?" And like right off the top, we said, "Oh, well, you're calm under pressure." And I thought about it as like, you're probably right. And so how that translates to me is we have a lot of things that happen in our organization. We have hurricanes here in Florida. We have, systems that fail us at times. We have, ER volume that just never stops. We have a lot of things that could be it could be a pressure cooker if you let it be. Right. And so I think that for me, as I was talking to him and kind of unpacking, is like, how does that, is that real? Do I agree with that? And I think that it really has to be sort of at the core of who we are as leaders, is being able to, on the surface, have calmness, have clarity. We may be paddling our legs like nobody's business under the surface, like a duck. But to the team, and especially the higher you climb in the leadership ranks, to the team, they need to see calmness. They need to see steady at the wheel. We'll get through whatever it is we'll get through. But yeah, that's to me, I think that's what I would agree with is a superpower. Just staying calm, staying even keel, very consistent and intentional.
It's a great one. Energy is contagious, right?
Right.
And if we're panicking, we're going to create panic. Even though we may be panicking, not letting people see it is a critical skill, superpower. I think too, Mark, you're also a very optimistic guy. I think that's a superpower for you in a world that has a lot of challenges right now, from workforce, healthcare, just all the political environment, things that we're in now. There's being optimistic and providing that optimism to others, because a lot of people, you have people that are looking at all the this is everything's going bad, or
Sure.
there's some good in that, and we have a choice of which side that we get to play on. I think, all the media, social media and stuff that people are kind of integrating in their life today create a lot of the pessimism and things that we see.
Sure.
So our job as leaders is harder today because of that, I believe.
Hmm.
I think another superpower you have is your ability to build relationships. That I think you're a great relational leader, and that
Thank
showed
you.
through our conversation today. So just want to make sure you heard that from me as well. I appreciate you being a great guest on the Lead Up podcast. Thanks so much.
Mike, it's a pleasure. It's always fun to spend time with you. Learned so much from you over the years. So great connecting with you and love your podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much.